Have you ever walked into a room and immediately felt out of place? Well, it's time you know you are not the problem, and there is a solution. Welcome to Room for Everybody, the podcast that celebrates diversity, promotes inclusive interior design strategies, and challenges the norms. I'm your host, Enzi Evergreen. Join us as we dive deep into the intersection of identity and design, listen to people's stories, and explore the beauty of our unique bodies. It's time to redesign our built environment in a way that shows we truly love and accept ourselves. Get ready to step into a world where everybody is celebrated because here there's room for everybody. We actually met when I took a size inclusive design course that Hannah designed, and that has informed my design strategies moving forward. So it feels really special to have you here today, Hannah. So thanks for making the time.
Yeah, happily.
Could you just tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself and some of the identities that you hold?
Yeah. Well, I live in Portland, Oregon. I grew up here, and that actually I feel like is core to my identity and the work that I do because I'm really passionate about shaping this particular place. Like I'm rooted in this place, inherently connected, and I want to contribute to this community. And I've been really fortunate to sort of through some, movement in my career path, ultimately land in this place where I get to be working in architecture, which is my background, and teaching in urban planning, urban design, which is also part of my background locally, and contributing to the built environment that way. So parts of my identity that are very involved in just sort of my interest in inclusive and equitable and accessible design is that well, I think for one, both of my parents are physicians, and that is something that just like growing up always had this lens of like bodies and how people interact with space, maybe more subconsciously until I got into architecture school and became really interested in, I've always been interested in design, but having an opportunity to sort of blend sort of the wellness and health aspect of human experience with the built environment has been very cool. And I also simultaneously have, over the last like probably 16 years at this point, have had chronic back issues from competitive sports as a high schooler that have really increasingly impacted my experience with going places and being able to work and those sorts of things. So in the last year, I have pretty substantial back surgery that actually really shifted my experience from doing a lot better now. But I really have had the firsthand experience of using a cane and having difficulty using stairs and feeling uncomfortable in a lot of the available seating options at restaurants and bars, and just kind of having a hard time being comfortable, like being outside of my house. So that has been a huge part of my shift towards or sort of focusing in on like the social aspects of architecture, but really focusing on accessible design, how disability impacts people's experience. And from there, though, like you mentioned that we had met because of your interest in what I kind of rebranded as fat friendly design because I thought it was more to the point and just uses terminology that is direct and looking at how we shape spaces that are supportive of plus size folks needs and their comfort, and also thinking about cultural welcome and just diving into decolonization and indigenization of our processes and design and what that means for aesthetics and what it means for community engagement practices. And I just have like kind of a laundry list of topics within this sort of like social umbrella of architecture and psychology and bodies and comfort and welcome and all of those things that I'm really fascinated by. And the whole intent is to be able to go directly to people who have experience in their own bodies and ask them, what do you need? What would be better? What is working? Where are the places you love to go? And sort of share that and elevate that. I think in a sense of identity, in that conversation about identity, I recognize that as a white woman who's also like, because I grew up here fairly connected within Portland, I do have a sense of visibility or just connection that is something that I find is really important to use to be able to contribute to the community. So it's really important to me to elevate voices and be the conduit amongst other people to be able to share resources and share stories and that sort of a thing. So I'm also a queer woman, and that's something that I feel like I haven't gotten to dive so much into as far as like spaces go. I do have a really cool book sitting over here. I'll grab it. I asked my boss to buy this for me up for the office, Queer Spaces. And I've just been flipping through it and kind of flagging stuff that's fun. It's like everything from, safe houses to clubs to stores to sort of like historical residences of people who are queer we now know about, and just real fun stuff. But that is a topic that I feel very fortunate to have grown up in Portland, which is a fairly safe space for queer folks, but recognize that that's not the case everywhere, and also not even everywhere in Portland. So I'm always really curious about that aspect of design and inclusion as well. I think I wrote all sorts of things in my registration form for the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, oh, cat mom. You may have seen there's a box with a cat in it, because my cats are my roommates, so I want them to have a fun time too. And my partner and I joke about how they need mind stimulation every day, and they love moving architecture. So I love moving architecture. I like to move my furniture all the time because I just always want to see how it feels in a different arrangement, and the cats love it. So pet parent is maybe a part of my identities as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think it's really beautiful how you've woven in your lived experience and your identities into the work that you're doing, but are also very sensitive to other people's identities and the identities that you don't hold, and trying to include those as well. I'm really interested in learning more about the community engagement piece and what strategies you found to be really effective to get that feedback from community in the projects that you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm excited I get to talk about the architecture firm I work for, because it's been a really good fit for me. So Holst Architecture is based in Portland. We also have a very small, like 4-person office in Minneapolis. And Holst has been around for over 30 years, but actually has had new ownership in the last like 5 or 6. And so there are 4 owners. All of them are parents, which I actually think has a huge impact on company culture, because people have this understanding of like the need for flexibility. There's just like always a lot happening in everyone's lives. At many times, people are working part-time to also be caretaking or be in school or whatnot. And there's just this like general understanding that flexibility is really critical, which is a huge part of accessibility just broadly. So that has been huge for me. Holst is officially woman owned. The 2 female partners have majority ownership, and also queer led. So that I think is unique in the architecture space. And again, like I think really shapes our company culture. We have, prior to my joining, Holst has done really incredible affordable housing and shelter and civic work for years and years, all over Portland and really in the Pacific Northwest in general, and have always really been connected to community voices and the processes. And a project I'm working on right now that's really a testament to that is the new East County Library. So the Multnomah County Library is sort of like the Portland library system, and we have a central library in the downtown core that's like this big historic building, just had a big renovation. It's always been known as sort of the hub, though the county, did this analysis and saw that, well, if you actually look at where the population is distributed across town, the majority of the library resources are really located towards the central downtown area, which is not where the whole population is. So in East County is where this new library it's already under construction. It's a really fast project because it's bond funded. So we have responsibility to the taxpayers to like stay on track. And it is in basically the edge of Gresham, which is the next sort of jurisdiction over and part of the county. And this is intended to be another flagship, like another huge library, giant resource for the community that is really serving like the, less white population. So many more of our communities of color, especially because of gentrification displacement, have like shifted outside of the central core of Portland. So there are a lot of reasons why this location makes a lot of sense to support communities who have been underserved by library resources and other resources. And because it's this huge, libraries are like the most public space, right? They have an enormous lift, a huge challenge to be able to serve everybody and make everybody feel welcome and safe in that space. There's this huge community process from the very beginning of the project. We've actually, in order to be consistent and make sure that there's some accountability through the process, we've partnered with community organizations who can that way be on board with us through the entire project. So they've been there from the very beginning, kickoff meetings, talk about what can you imagine in this space? And then in really just like a year and a half, they're going to be helping us give tours to community members when the building actually opens, and have been hosting focus groups and doing different types of outreach with us, tabling at community events and that sort of a thing, which in all of that engagement, so the tabling events, I think I had probably been to 50 different events in the last year and a half, 2 years. My colleague Shannon's been at most of them. She's like a project manager and she's at like every event. And we hear, hundreds of comments in each of these engagements. We type them all up. We put them all in a spreadsheet. We have over 10,000 individual comments from the community in this spreadsheet that I've like compiled together. That's not even all of it. We're like missing some things from earlier. It's been a huge process. The questions will be as broad as like in the very beginning when we're asking these more visioning questions, like what does the library mean to you? What are 3 words that you would use to describe a library? That was something in one of our early surveys. So we got hundreds of responses to that. And then we'll have these focus groups, like we did some accessibility focus groups, and the questions will be very specific, like what will make a computer station in this library physically accessible to you? Something along those lines, where someone will give us very precise feedback about the type of chair that would be comfortable for them, or that they need an adjustable height desk, or where they would like to have that in the library. So I think, your question was sort of like, well, I may have forgotten what it was like, how do you make that effective? Or like, how are you really connecting the information, and maybe beyond just collecting the information, how does that get incorporated into design? And that is, when you have 10,000 comments, it can be hard to sort of filter through everything. But basically, like at every event, we recap, we make a little report that we submit to the library and have for our own sake to just sort of review, like what were the kind of high level comments we felt like were coming out of that. We've documented every single comment, so we can go back and search for the individual comments, but we're looking for things that we haven't thought of already. One of the nice things is that as we've gotten further along in the process, a lot of the comments we're getting, we're like, oh, we've already done that. We've already included that. And then we'll also get comments that are just things we haven't thought of that we flag and go, oh, we need to talk about this with the design team. A lot of examples in particular came up on the bathroom design. And that is something that in my outreach, I sort of decided to place as like the primary sort of takeaway of like, how do we go above and beyond ADA to make people with disabilities feel more welcome and comfortable in public or shared spaces, is that the reality is bathrooms are so important. If you can't go to the bathroom somewhere because it's not set up to support you, then you really like can't be somewhere. Or you might go to a concert and then have to go home halfway because you can't use the restroom facility that's available to you. So, or just like the anxiety of not knowing if a bathroom is going to meet your needs can really limit people from leaving their house. So some of the bathroom details that were important to us were like small details like, where is the paper towel dispenser located? Because if you are someone who's using a mobility device and you're washing your hands and then your hands are all wet, are you going to have to move your walker across the room to get the paper towels, or are they right there where you can reach them? Mm-hmm. So it can be really like seemingly small details like that are like a fairly easy fix for us, right? To just be like, oh, how can we reorganize that space? And, sometimes you'll get real wonky comments out of nowhere, like, I think there should be a slide from the second floor to the first floor. And I go like, that would be cool, but definitely not happening. I'm sorry, that would have been fun, but a liability for the library. But it's really fun. It's really absolutely my favorite part of my job is like being at a focus group and getting to talk to people and go like, what do you want to see here? And then know that in a year or 2 years, when we open the project, that they can walk in, roll in, and see that classroom space that they were talking about has what they had hoped for, and get to like show it off to their friends and hopefully use it a lot.
Yeah, definitely. That's really cool. And I think good to just hear the process kind of laid out like that, because I feel like sometimes people think that it doesn't matter what they have to say about it, but to really hear how you're listening and including that feedback in the design process is really cool.
And it's a testament to the library and their own process that they have been so oriented around community. We have a partner on that project Suzanne, who leads the engagement from the library side and has established a process that's equitable and has a lot of checks and balances of sharing the information, making sure it's reviewed and sort of summarized so that we're not losing the information as we move through the process. Maybe this is a good way to segue to my own research, because something that I sort of get concerned with in this engagement process in architecture projects is that oftentimes it's so limited to the project itself that information that gets collected that could be really good intel for lots of other projects is just sort of contained within the project team. And they're the only people who really see that information and then sort of try to apply it to the project. They take that and body knowledge with them to their next projects, but we're not really sharing it broadly. And so that was really the motivation for me to start the Disabled Joy outreach project and share information about designing above and beyond the ADA, because it feels like it's exhausting for people to get asked over and over, even if it's not you personally who's being asked, for like the community to be asked over and over, what would make you feel more welcome? What would be better, in support of your accessibility needs? And then just like have it disappear and get asked again and again. So my intent with the first project I kind of did venturing out on my own was the size inclusive design process with Rebecca Alexander, who started AllGo, which is this fantastic app for plus size folks to rate their comfort in public settings. And she and I wanted to just like talk to plus size people and find out like what is fat friendly furniture. Tell us what are the best practices, what feels most comfortable, where are the places you've been that you feel really great and supported. And I think that is one thing I'm trying to do in my framing is like orient around joy and say, we know that like you're not just suffering. Like if you're not being built for, there are places that oftentimes people build for themselves, right? Like their home environments are really suited to their needs. And then also you probably find places out in the world where you do feel really welcome. And so we want to highlight those places and sort of elevate that, like, somebody's done it right. And so we always use that example of Palomar, which is this bar in Portland that has really fantastic fat-friendly furniture, and it looks gorgeous, and it's really sturdy and a lot of different options for people in the space. So it's really embodying a lot of the different best practices of like giving people agency to choose, do you want to sit at bar height or not? Do you need a chair with arms or not? And to be able to sort of highlight those best practices and share with designers to say, hey, we don't need to like figure this out on every project individually, like just know this as a whole and move forward with that. And from there, I sort of moved into this Design for Disabled Joy outreach process to do a survey and then do interviews with folks, attempting to reach people on like a very broad spectrum of access needs and just sort of highlight the ADA is over 30 years old. It has barely evolved in that time. It is a very low, it's a baseline of non-discrimination. It's the best way to describe it, and provides for some level of safety for people with disabilities, but it really doesn't help people feel super comfortable. And there's a lot that is not addressed that we are understanding a lot better now, like that people have different sensory needs, and that is really hard to build into like a code or like design guidelines, and that feel like there's really a need for people to actually understand people's experiences enough that you can start to sort of extrapolate and make your own decisions about your own designs, knowing that every design is totally different. You have different opportunities, but that certain patterns on walls contrasting with patterns on floors could be really overwhelming for some people, or that if you're going to create, like in a library, if you're going to create a big open public space, then you're also going to need some spaces for people to retreat to where that feels safe and more contained for folks who are on the autism spectrum or have other sort of sensory needs. So yeah, I've really, when I was working for myself, was sort of oriented around this data collection of reaching out directly to people and then sharing the information directly with designers to just make sure we can make sure everybody feels more welcome. Engagement has become so core to architecture, which I'm proud of the architecture profession for moving that direction. There have been many, many decades of urban design specifically, like, when you're designing an individual residence, like you have a clear client, you design it exactly for their needs. If you're designing a building that, even if it's like all private residences or all private offices, your building inevitably impacts people's experience on the street and in the built environment, like urban public realm. And so there's always space for careful thought around what people need and how a building can contribute to the public realm. Even if it's just like a bench mid-block for people who have a hard time moving around is like the most wonderful thing to stumble upon when you're like taking
Mhm.
a slow stroll from personal experience, you know. And I still post back surgery, like will go out for walks and I can be a slow walker or a fast walker depending on the day. And a lot of the time I'm just like looking for places to sit down or take a stretch. So just being conscious of those things as a designer, I think is a shift that we're really making, that it's like architecture is less art. It is
Mhm.
certainly art, and it is also different. It's public. It's like a whole, the magic of architecture, I think, is that you're like bridging those things.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think it's a big responsibility for sure.
Yeah.
How do you deal with any pushback around inclusive design strategies, like people saying that it costs too much, or maybe that doesn't matter because they themselves have not necessarily experienced barriers to space?
Yeah, I do find that it's usually more about budget than bias. Maybe given the type of work that we're doing and just sort of the clients that we have. Holst works with a lot of nonprofits, and like the other things we're working on right now are like rehabilitation spaces where trauma-informed design is absolutely utmost importance and everybody really is on board with that. And accessibility is also critical, I think. But, you know, even in project I'm assisting with right now is a housing project that's being developed with the intent of supporting people who have what the sort of shorthand is IDD, so intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that is a tough conversation because it's affordable housing and there's a very limited budget to begin with. So the hope is that we can run through all the best practices we have, and there are good resources beyond just sort of our known best practices, but there's this guideline called the Kelsey Standards that is for residential design that is like really one of those above and beyond the ADA sort of references. They've done a lot of work with disabled folks with lots of different needs to sort of highlight what is supportive of people in a residence, both in the units, but also in the shared spaces and sort of navigationally. So we can do, it's really about sort of presenting all the options to the client and say, look, these are all of the things that we could do in this building that we think would be supportive of this demographic and their safety and comfort. And then sort of vet it with just like what's feasible. And maybe we can't do this in every single unit in the building, but in the 13 units that we have highlighted for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we will try to use different type of air units that are quieter because we want it to be like less distracting to them. And so it really, I mean, I think that is a huge challenge, is that it is, things do cost more. Something like an adjustable height, adult size changing table to put in a public restroom could be really cost prohibitive at the moment, but we have a project where we've like in the public restroom, we've allocated the space that would be required for that. So knowing that in the future, they may add that. So there is sort of the opportunity to phase things as well and think about if there's a way to sort of carve out space for something to happen in the future. Given that we're working with a lot of like nonprofits, we're like, well, right now we just don't have the funds to do that thing, even though we would love to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that also the work that you're doing to share information and feedback that you've gotten from communities around best practices can also help with that budget piece. Like if
Yeah.
they don't have to then do their own focus group process and they're like able to absorb that information, that is really important.
Yeah, I'm always an advocate of having the conversation, even if you feel like pretty confident that you're not going to convince somebody to do something because of the cost prohibitiveness of that, or that you think they're not going to be interested in it, that having the conversation itself is still a good step, and that we can't be afraid of that because that means we're not sharing the information about what we believe is true or the best practice. And that to me is like a really, it's a noble step, right? To be like, I'm nervous about this conversation with the client. I don't think they'll get it, but I'm going to prep as best I can to be able to give them the rundown of like why this is considered the best practice. And then they have the information. Maybe it doesn't happen on this project, but it happens on the next one, or they just sort of are getting more on board with you about what we should be thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. What is a space that is currently bringing you joy?
Well, I love my apartment. I just moved in March. I feel like I am just getting settled. Something I was thinking about in preparation for this is everything in my apartment is movable, like in some way. So when I talk about like best practices for accessible design, one of the things I talk about is options equals access. So like no one size fits all. Like when you're designing a public space, you obviously have to have different ways for people to engage, flexibility within the options you provide so that people can adjust things. That's sort of a principle from trauma-informed design is like agency over space is really important for people. It makes you feel, in control of your life. But in the case of sort of designing for my own self, my experience with chronic back pain over the last, like mostly over the last decade has really moved me to find ways to have that, like the options built into my own space. So this IKEA futon, I almost want to burn it because I spent like 6 months sleeping on this last year before my back surgery.
Yeah.
Like couldn't sleep on my mattress. This like, so I shouldn't burn it because it's beloved. It like saved my back at that time, but it folds down to a bed. So it can be either, a couch or a bed. And sometimes I work just laying down on it with my laptop. I have these like other side, IKEA eye bars that my partner helped me put casters on the bottom. So there's
Nice.
I got nice blue casters because I wasn't sure if I wanted them all to be on that wall or this wall. And she was like, you should just have wheels on everything. Like you should just be able to move it around in the case I do want to change the arrangement of the space. And then I'm not hurting my back when I move my furniture around. I'm also at a sit-stand desk, which is nice. This also in particular, this is kind of interesting because if you are someone who has a disability and is not aware, the vocational rehabilitation is program that is run like every state has a vocational rehabilitation program and is basically set up to keep people who have disabilities in the workforce and try to find ways to support them. And it took me like a year to get through the process. When I was like I submitted my information when I couldn't even stand. And now I've had a surgery, I'm back at work full time, all these things have happened. And I finally got through all the system they bought me an adjustable height desk to work at home and an iPad because it's much more comfortable for me to be laying down and working at times. And that is just like an incredible resource that taxes pay for, right? That a lot of people don't know exists. And they just kind of do like an assessment of what your needs are and how certain tools like assistive technology could help you to just stay functional and stay working. So I have this desk. I also have a chair on the way that's fantastic. It's called a Capisco. They're very expensive, but they're incredible for my back issues in particular. I have one at the office at my work, and it's like, I wish I had a picture of it. It's got like, the back is almost like a plus sign. You're a furniture person. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't think I've seen this one.
It's got like the back's almost shaped like a plus sign. And so you can sit on it facing forward or backwards. You can sort of sit like on it like a saddle. And the one that I have goes up to bar height. And I basically always sit at it with my table at like standing height. And then I switch between standing and sitting on it. It allows your hips to be at a more natural, like organic angle, because actually our hips aren't like, there are not 90-degree angles like in our bone structure. So it feels really nice to have sort of that an openness to your hips. Actually, have you read the book, The Chair?
I have not.
It's not for everybody unless you really love chairs, which I do. And it talked about there's a particular like angle of repose that your body goes into naturally in water or in outer space. That is like, I think it's like 135-degree opening from like your belly button to your legs, basically, that you just sort of naturally fall into. So being in a perched sort of bar height setting is more supportive of that than being in like a 90-degree chair. So it just kind of gives your hips this like natural opening. Probably has to do with like how you sort of form in the womb.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. And so when you look at like the design of lounger chairs, a lot of them sort of end up in that sort of rough, like I think it's probably like, 130, 135 or something like that degree opening. That just sort of feels supportive of your back. So the chair is huge for me. Right now I'm using a stool that's not great, but I have a little bench below me so that my legs can be perched at all sorts of different heights.
Mhm.
And then also I have some little rolling tables back behind me, other IKEA goods, but because I don't want my coffee table to just be static and in the way, because I have this nice fluffy carpet, which is
Mhm.
because I want to roll around on the floor and stretch. I need to stretch all the time to make sure my back is healthy. So I have those tables on casters so that I can slide them off out of the way and just have like a nice big open space to like full spread eagle. Because I think it's really important to take up space, and feel comfortable doing that. I always feel really claustrophobic when I try to stretch just on like a yoga mat shape.
Yeah.
You're not a prisoner of the mat. You can go wider. So. Yeah. And I think probably visible to you, but I love color. I think that that's always been a part of my aesthetic, just like very rainbowy. I'm a Lisa Frank kid.
Mhm.
And I think part of that too is that I really like when I've been in a lot of pain, I think I'm looking for there to just be joy in my surroundings. And so color is one way that I love to do that. Just like
Mhm.
have there just be like this fun, positive energy around me.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
really like it. It does feel very joyful just looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. I'm also in this brand new building, which in my life, I've only ever lived in spaces that are like 120 years old. So it's really amazing just have like crisp angles where the paint has built up over decades. Interestingly, so this building I'm in was built to be condos, which means that there's a higher level of finish. So basically, like for non-architecture people, that just means you use nicer finished products. So like the countertops, even the drawers, like I have soft closed drawers, which is funny. I always mention that to people when I talk about it.
Those
But I
make me
think
so
how
happy.
luxury, right? Yeah, where it's like, well, it's a sound thing, so sensory thing, right? Where you're not hearing these like thuds and clunks and
I feel
just
like it's also a touch thing for me. Like it
yeah.
just, I can like feel the smoothness.
Yeah, it's so satisfying. But I think there's other, I mean, it's just disappointing to me that there's this like understanding like condo people need this. It's like at this level of finish. And apartment people, like they don't need that. But it really is about budget. It's that when you're like putting together a building and you go, oh, we're going to get condo dollars back because people are going to buy these units. We have to make them high-end finishes so people will want to buy them. And this ended up not working out as condos and other apartments, and I just get to benefit. Spa-like tub, but also I think there's some stuff built in that in the community spaces are really oriented around this being a community and there being sort of, there's like an espresso machine in the lobby and this little Zen garden. And a lot of people are in and out with their dogs and talking to each other and really like being in community, which I don't feel like is built infrastructure that you see in a lot of apartment buildings. So I just like
Yeah.
to highlight that as why just condo people? Like, why do only condo people get that? Because it's ended up being like I've met a lot of my neighbors just sitting by the espresso machine and talking about their dogs with them. So I know that when we're talking about, big expensive projects, there's always stuff that's on the line to get cut from a budget perspective. But I always think like you may have heard the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. And just to say that it takes a lot more energy and materials to like build something brand new. But I also think the most sustainable building is one that's beloved and one that's like really supportive of community, because if you love a space, you maintain it, it stays in good condition. People, want to be there. And that's hard to like put a dollar value on in a project budget that this space, it'll probably last longer than ones that don't have that feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours about all of this because there's so much more even to dig into and
Yeah.
discuss. But I really appreciate your time here today and sharing your expertise. If people would like to work with you or learn more from you, how can they find you?
Yeah. So I'd say the Holst website, so HOLSTARC.com, holstarc.com. You can find my email there. And there's also a page there about all the Disabled Joy outreach, and you can find the video there. I can share links to that as well. Also, you could become an urban planning student at Portland State University and take my urban design class. But yeah, or reach out on LinkedIn to Holst, that sort of a thing. I love to chat about this stuff. I love to support other designers and just share the information. So happy to link all of that stuff to people.
Yeah. Wonderful. And I will include that in the notes. I definitely see you as someone that I continue to learn from and appreciate the work that you're doing in the world. Makes me feel less alone. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's really helpful to have a network of folks who are having these conversations, and it's growing, certainly. Super exciting to see all the interest, and design is really shifting. It's really exciting.
Hello, dear listener. Thank you for tuning in for another episode. This podcast is produced by Eden Environments, an inclusive and sustainable interior design firm. Our human-centric design strategy creates spaces that are fat and neurodivergent friendly, trauma-informed, and sustainable. If that sounds like what you need, contact me through Eden's website to get started. For the latest updates, sign up for emails and follow along on your favorite social media platform. And until we meet again, I wish you gentle days.